The Star Trek universe is no stranger to time travel and temporal events. However, one time ship, in particular, was perhaps the most deadly design ever created. We're of course talking of the Krenim Weapon Starship, which was capable of erasing entire civilizations from history. The Federation Starship Voyager, which was stranded in the Delta Quadrant, unfortunately encountered this Temporal Weapon Ship and was forced to do battle against it. But what about the origins of the starship and what made it so powerful? In today's Star Trek Explained video, we'll be taking a look at this vessel. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. Before we do warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. We're enjoying making these Star Trek videos on various topics, and we hope you're enjoying watching them. If you do want to support their development, please join our Patreon via the link below. You'll get exclusive access to videos and events, as well as more Galaxy class rewards. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay, engage. Due to the size of the Starship design and its onboard systems, which we'll discuss in a moment, the vessel's mass resulted in it only being able to travel at warp 6. This made it relatively slow compared to other ships within the Delta Quadrant. The exact size of the vessel is unknown, but it is approximately 1,550 meters in length. The key part of the Starship design was its primary weapon. Located at the fore of the ship, the large apparatus would make up nearly half of the ship's length. 6 large pylons would amplify and focus the temporal energies. This was a beam that pushed objects out of a space-time continuum, therefore effectively erasing them from history. To enact this, the weapon required careful and meticulous calculations. These were needed to create the exact changes in the timeline that the operator desired. An example of a weapon's power was it being deployed against an entire species by firing on that species' homeworld. Therefore, this pushed the species out of the space-time continuum. As such, this caused the causality paradox. All of history that that species played any part in would be altered. In targeting a populated planet, the weapon beam would leave an untouched land in place, showing what would happen if that species had never colonized the planet, or evolved there. This starship obtained its power to affect timelines from the onboard temporal core. While able to power the beam weapon, the core also had a defensive measure. For example, when it was powered on and in operation, the core kept the starship, and everyone and everything on board, outside of normal space-time. Therefore, this would render the ship immune to conventional weapons, and therefore also protect the onboard crew from the flow of time. As such, the crew could be considered immortal. Without the temporal core, the starship would be vulnerable to attack. The installed shields were weak. Even a photon grenade could penetrate the hull. While typically the starship would use a temporal core as a defense, in the event of its failure, the vessel was fed with directed energy weapons. These were powerful enough to defend the vessel from attacks by multiple starships. The Krenim temporal weapon was also equipped with temporal chronoton torpedoes. Its onboard sensors were highly advanced. These allowed the vessel's crew to monitor timeline changes near instantaneously, which was way faster than any system the likes of Starfleet had. This likely worked with the onboard computer systems, which were highly advanced. The computer could account for many factors in the timeline changes. In terms of an interior layout, there were plenty of locations on board. The bridge was relatively simple, but it did have a seat for the commanding officer and areas for the crew to operate the temporal weapon and also scan and study the temporal changes. Another point of interest on board the vessel was the commanding officer's museum of sorts. This contained lost relics from worlds and cultures that the starship had erased from existence. The Krenim Temporal Weapon Starship was built and conceived by Anorax, a military temporal scientist of the Krenim Imperium. The first known use of this starship and its weapon was in the 2170s. During this year, the starship and its weapon were activated and used against a species known as the Rilnar, an enemy of the Krenim Imperium. This temporal incursion would result in the restoration of the preeminence of the Krenim. However, it did result in an unforeseen outcome. Unexpectedly, a plague would be born that resulted in the loss of 50 million Krenim lives. Wanting to correct the error, Anorax, who was commanding the Temporal Weapon Ship, proceeded with a second temporal incursion. Again, this also produced an error. It inadvertently erased the Krenim colony at Kyana Prime, also erasing Anorax's wife in the process. Over the next 2 centuries, Anorax would continue to alter history with the starship. He was driven by trying to restore his wife. Due to his campaign, several civilizations, including the Azorian Empire, the Malkoth, the Zal, and more, were eliminated in the process. Eventually, the Krenim Weapon Ship would encounter the Federation Intrepid-class USS Voyager, which was traversing the Delta Quadrant after being stranded there. Unfortunately, Voyager became caught up in Anorax's shenanigans. When the Temporal Weapon was used to target and erase a species known as the Zal, Voyager was in the middle of their space. Once the Temporal incursion was complete, Voyager was now in Krenim space and faced attack from Krenim warships. The species employed chronoton torpedoes against the Starfleet vessel, which could not defend itself against these weapons. With regular deflector shields near useless, Voyager's crew developed temporal shields to use against the torpedoes. Due to the use of the temporal shields, it caused disruptions in the precise calculations that Anorax's crew had made. Therefore, the temporal incursion against the Graynor resulted in a miss. Instead of a restoration of Krenim territory, including the missing colony, a new timeline was created. In this timeline, the Krenim Imperium never existed at all. Of course, this was deemed unacceptable. Anorax turned the weapon on Voyager and targeted the vessel. Voyager did escape using a superior warp drive, able to outrun the Time warship. The downfall of Anorax and its temporal weapon was of course brought about by Captain Catherine Janeway and the USS Voyager. The now badly damaged Intrepid-class starship led a small fleet against the Krenim's timeship. However, one of the big successes for Voyager and its allied fleet came from on board the temporal ship itself. Some of the crew, including Anorax's second in command, grew tired of the endless and futile mission and shut down the temporal core. With the deactivation of the temporal core, the starship phased back into normal space-time, allowing the allied fleet to attack. However, its conventional weapons were still enough to hold back the small attack group. Knowing the location of the temporal core, Voyager's Captain Janeway had her remaining crew abandon ship and set a collision course. Taking her temporal shields offline, and the allied fleets, Janeway rammed Voyager into the Krenim Weapon Ship, right onto the temporal core, causing a massive explosion.
Time's up.
The destruction of a vessel caused a temporal incursion that erased the ship itself from history, and with it, every single one of the alterations in the timeline it had ever made. In an odd sense of irony, this had the effect of accomplishing what Anorax had set out to do. The colony of Kiana Prime was restored, with Anorax's wife also being restored. The events here are known as the Year of Hell. The multiplayer tabletop game, known as Star Trek Attack Wing, names the Krenim Weapon Ship as the Kiana Prime. While we don't see or hear of the Krenim Temple Ship again in the Star Trek universe, the MMO video game of Star Trek Online does use the events in its own storyline. This does exist outside of a canon Star Trek storyline. In the in-game mission, Time in a Bottle, the events reveal that the Krenim are aware of what happened with Anorax. They offer the Delta Alliance, which is made up of the Federation, Klingon Empire, and Romulan Republic, a set of schematics of the Weapon Starship to be used against the Iconians. This takes place during the Iconian War arc. The Alliance eventually create the Starship, and is commissioned as the KIV Anorax. Star Trek Online's storyline gets rather wild with this weapon. For example, if the Alliance used it directly against the Iconians, then it would result in the discovery of warp travel being delayed by more than 50,000 years. The ship eventually makes an incursion that restores the destroyed planet of Romulus, only to find it totally assimilated by the Borg. Eventually, the ship is successful in allowing the player's character to go back in time and deal with the Iconian problem once and for all. The ship makes another appearance in the future-proof storyline. We recommend you play these missions in-game for yourself to really experience the fun. Year of Hell was a big two-part episode of the Star Trek Voyager's 4th season. It seems the creative team behind the show always loved the idea of seeing the USS Voyager even more damaged here and there. Veteran Star Trek designer Rick Sternbach had produced a series of drawings showing Voyager with different levels of damage. The design of a Krenim Temporal Weapon Starship went back to the 3rd season. Writer Ken Biller had included a mention of a Krenim and Year of Hell in a 3rd season episode before and after. As such, this stuck in series exec Brannon Braga's mind. Braga and his co-writer, Joe Melensky, would have to think about how time could be used as a weapon. Brannon came with the idea that the Krenim species would use some sort of Death Star-like weapon. This would unleash beams capable of raising a planet from history, instead of outright destroying it. Concept artist and illustrator Steve Berg would design the Krenim Weapon Ship. Early sketches of the design were very close to the finished design, with Berg describing it as a giant gun. For added context, Berg was also the person behind the design of the Species 8472 bioships that were seen in Star Trek Voyager. Berg had previously explained his thinking behind the design of the vessel. He envisioned the Starship as a massive temporal gun, with the rear section being this huge energy core that could generate power for the ship and disrupt time itself. Foundation Imaging's Ron Thornton built the final model of the design. VFX staff members had previously commented how the final battle, in Year of Hell, was one of the most ambitious in the series' history, given that Voyager and the Krenim vessel collide together and scrape alongside one another. It showed the damage that had not been seen before. This battle, and the sequences involved in this episode, would result in the first Emmy nomination that Foundation Imaging would receive for its work on Star Trek. So that's our detailed breakdown of the Krenim Temporal Weapon Starship in the Star Trek universe. Do you agree with our assessment that this is the most deadly timeship in the Star Trek universe, or do you think there is another vessel design that deserves this title? Let us know in the comments below. As mentioned, you can support the development of Trek Central's videos. Please join our Patreon via the link below. You'll get exclusive access to videos and events, as well as more Galaxy class rewards. If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media, or join our community Discord server. For now, I've been Captain Jack, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends. Goodbye.